Hi, I decided to do my presentation over the environmental justice issue of the Flint, Michigan water crisis. So just some brief introduction. As we all know and as we've all heard about, there was a major water crisis in Flint, Michigan, which is still currently ongoing. This is a brief introduction. The city switched over from Detroit's water supply, which came from Lake Huron. They switched from that to the Flint River, which was a cost-saving attempt in the spring of 2014. Inadequate treatment and testing of that water resulted in major water quality and health issues for the entire city and the entire county where Flint is located. The Flint water crisis is one of the largest environmental justice cases that we've had in the United States in the past 50 years. A big part of this issue is the idea that there was a major lack of oversight, a lack of diligence when these huge decisions were being made for a community predominantly black and a community with a large amount of residents living below the poverty line. So the Michigan Civil Rights Commission labeled the issue as a result of systemic racism due to the poor response from the government. And as I mentioned, that is due to the just sheer oversight and diligence or lack of diligence, I should say, in the entire issue. Flint is predominantly black at 54%, while over 37% of its total residents are living below the poverty line. So the large argument here is in an affluent community, or predominantly white affluent community, we don't see these types of issues, and there's just much more diligence and there's much more oversight in terms of when these decisions are being made and how they're being made and what people and who they'll be affecting as time goes on. So just a brief timeline, just to give you guys a broad picture and broad understanding of what transpired, what happened, and the lack of response from several organizations and as well as the government. So in April 2014, the city of Flint switched from Detroit's water supply to the Flint River. In May of that same year, just a month later, residents began to complain of smelly water, of foul-colored water. In August of 2014, E. coli in total coliform was detected. So that bacteria was just detected a few months after the switch was made to the Flint River. In October of 2014, General Motors stopped using the Flint water for their factory production. They had fear that the water was acidic and would corrode their parts, so they stopped using the water in October of 2014. Fast forward to January of 2015, TTHM was found, which are carcinogenous chemicals found in the water due to over dumping chlorine just into the water main to try to eliminate some of the bacteria like the E. coli and total coliform that was found. And then February 2015, so now we're in the new year, high levels of lead were then starting to show up in homes being tested. In April of 2015, state agency notified the EPA that corrosion controls were not implemented the way they needed to be. Then going to September, studies from a pediatrician revealed elevated levels of lead in children. In that same month, the city issued a lead advisory. In October of 2015, the city of Flint switched back to the Detroit water supply. By then, it was feared that it was too late and the damage had already been done. The pipes were already corroded, and there was irreversible damage that had already transpired. In December of 2015, the mayor declared a state of emergency. And then also later on that month, state regulation officials started to resign due to the lack of diligence, and they were getting a lot of heat from the community and the federal government for not doing what they were supposed to be doing throughout these 2 years of this contaminated water. Then finally, in January 2016, the governor then declared a state of emergency almost 2 full years after the incident occurred. So just a bit of causation. So like I mentioned, what happened was the city of Flint switched from Detroit supply to the Flint River supply. The problem is the Flint River was extremely contaminated and extremely acidic, but like I said, lack of oversight and lack of diligence, this was overlooked, and the water was switched from Detroit's supply to the Flint River. Then, in an attempt to just surely cut back on costs, that was the sole purpose of it. The switch caused the pipes to then corrode because of the acidity, and then from then, lead began to leach into homes, the taps, everything else, everywhere the water was going. Lead was then leached into it, and other harmful contaminants as well, into all of the municipal water supply. So we talked about the Flint River a little bit, and so let me give you a little bit of significance. So just for some basic understanding, here in Indianapolis, the White River is the largest river that flows through central Indiana, and we get about 2/3 of our drinking water from the river. The Flint River is comparable to that, but the problem is, since the founding of Flint, the river was always mismanaged. So there's a couple main sources of pollution in the river. Two huge ones that contributed a lot to what happened actually was the industrial waste and the untreated human wastewater. So factories, as Flint grew and expanded, factories started popping up along the river, right next to the river to be able to utilize that water source in their factories and cool their parts or use it for a number of different things. But what was happening is those industries were then just pouring their wastewater back into the Flint River, creating huge environmental problems for the river, obviously. And then also untreated human wastewater. We all know why that's a huge problem. As that was dumped into the river, some intentionally, some unintentionally. Nevertheless, untreated human wastewater in a river where we're getting drinking water from is obviously never going to be a solution. And then also, the river is very warm during the summer months, and it doesn't flow very fast. There's stagnant water in many portions of the river, which create a space for bacteria and harmful organisms to grow, which then also can get into our drinking water. And we have all of these problems just adding up, compiling to the issue. So we talked about lead poisoning just a little bit. Lead poisoning was, without a doubt, the number one issue from the Flint water crisis. So lead poisoning can be extremely detrimental for anyone, but as most of us probably know, for children it can have humongous and lasting impacts. A couple common examples of permanent damage when exposed to high levels of lead in your drinking water can include damage to the brain, kidneys, nerves, and your blood. So obviously when you're dealing with those major organs and those major systems in your body, you don't want those infecting, those poisoned in that way. Some immediate symptoms of lead poisoning. So as I said, in May, just a month after that they made the switch, residents began to complain. So aside from the fact that the water was discolored, the water was smelly, they also were experiencing these here: headaches, nausea, stomach aches, tiredness, and irritability. These are all telltale signs of lead poisoning that can happen when you are exposed to high amounts of lead. Children exposed to lead often have high levels in their blood, which they can also, children are unique in the fact that a lot of times they don't present with symptoms of lead poisoning. Meanwhile, they have these high concentrations of lead in their blood, which can be very dangerous if there's no signs and there's no warning of something imminently dangerous or imminently bad for that child, and then all of a sudden now you're in the hospital and you're dealing with issues that you just didn't know you had. So we'll keep on talking about children here for a while. The lasting impact on children can be tremendous. So a 2015 study done by Flint pediatrician I talked about earlier in the timeline revealed that elevated blood lead levels had doubled in children since 2014, just a year after they made that switch to the Flint River. And in some neighborhoods of Flint, levels almost tripled in children. That just goes to show, in just a year, doubling and tripling the amount of lead in your blood in a small child can be extremely detrimental. It is estimated that over 9,000 total children were supplied with lead-contaminated water for over 18 months straight, which obviously you put all these things together, and that's a very long time for children to be exposed to this lead, which causes these lasting impacts. one of which for both adults and children, there's been studies done that show that behavioral health has actually declined due to lead poisoning. Parents started noticing all sorts of different and erratic behavior from children that were tested, and they had higher levels of lead in their system. So for adults, a lot of the same, and a lot of it has to do with lead. After the switch to the Flint River for the water supply, the third largest outbreak of Legionnaire's disease ever recorded in U.S. history happens. The disease is essentially like supersized pneumonia, a very dangerous pneumonia. The outbreak killed at least 12 people and sickened at least another 87. So that is a huge number of people that were impacted by this one disease. Not to mention all of the other lead-related illnesses that came with it. In an attempt to purify the water, the city dumped an excess of chlorine into the water mains, creating a brand new problem: elevated levels of total trihalomethanes, which are considered cancer-causing chemicals. We talked about this a little bit in the timeline. These started showing up, and this is something that, the situation lasts for a few years, and everyone thinks the water's fine, but it doesn't take much for these to get into your system, and now you have cancer-causing agents in your system doing a devastating thing to your body, which obviously no one likes that. And that is one of the main lasting impacts, especially for adults coming from extended exposure to lead poisoning. I talked about the behavioral health impacts of children. A lot of mental health impacts have been noticed in adults with lead poisoning. It has been proven that many people, and we'll get into it here in the next couple slides, but it's been proven that households noticed a significant decline in mental health and behavioral health for both adults and children due to this lead poisoning. So here we can, I'll expand on that a little bit more. 66% of all households claim that one or more adults in the house have since declined in behavioral and mental health since being exposed to contaminated water. So that is a huge number. That's a staggering number. Over half the population has declined in mental and behavioral health. And we're not talking about just children here. These are adults that are experiencing these fluctuations in behavior and mental health after this lead poisoning. 54% of all households claim a noticeable difference in at least one child's behavior. So again, over half the population is noticing a staggering difference in their child's health, their child's behavior post-contamination of this water, which again, that's over half the population. That is a huge number of people that are noticing different behaviors in their children due to lead poisoning. 34% of Flint's population noticed an increased level of anxiety. Meanwhile, 29% self-reported symptoms of depression. This is all consistent. This is all consistent with lead poisoning and all the research behind that. And these numbers just go to show. I mean, we're talking about a city with a huge population, an absolute immense population, and these numbers, 66, 54, 34, 29% of the population. Those are huge chunks of people, huge portion of people in the population that have had lasting impacts now due to this lack of diligence and lack of oversight and created in this lead poisoned water. So a couple of solutions that can take place to essentially fix Flint's water solution, or fix Flint's water crisis permanently, would be one, the biggest thing would be to replace every single distribution pipe throughout the entire city. This would be an extremely costly procedure. $1.5 billion is estimated, but this is truly the only way to ensure that lead will stop leaching into the water supply. Even though they switch back to Detroit's water, lead can still leach in through all of the corroded pipes. And once the pipes are corroded, as they are, there's just not much you can do to make that water better. So they are in the process of that. And then the other thing that many residents adopted was installing permanent water filters on all faucets in your kitchen, your bathroom, showers, everything, because the lead was so high, you couldn't even shower, you couldn't bathe in it. So they decided that this was a route that they would go. And these filters actually, with water tested, the tested water out of the filters has a undetectable level of lead in it, which is considered extremely safe. It's safer than the typical drinking water that you and I would drink. So this has been a great solution for many residents in Flint, Michigan. To wrap things up, this is one of the largest environmental justice issues in the United States in over 50 years. We didn't dive too deep into that. I stuck more towards the science behind it and what caused it and what are some things that are being done about it. But was a lot done in terms of reform and civil rights violations and also just stuff with that. There was devastating impacts on everyday life. I mean, just considering the fact that people couldn't even shower for almost 2 years with the water that came out of their bathroom is just absolutely ridiculous. It's unimaginable for me. And then the lasting health complications due to lead poisoning. We talked about the carcinogenous elements that can cause cancer. We talked about the mental and behavioral health impacts of both adults and children. And then most importantly, solutions are in progress, but they're costly and very time consuming. So although they're being worked on, it's going to take a while for the city of Flint to be back to normal again, and for something like this to never happen again. And here are my references. Thank you.